Chapter 3 The Road to Chaos. Emperor Constantine had something else to worry about too. The Romans had built a mighty empire that included the rich provinces of North Africa and Egypt, as well as much of Europe. Previous rulers of Rome had long realised that keeping an eye on what happened in the East was what mattered. This was where the threats and challenges came from, but also opportunities from trade, cooperation, and the exchange of ideas. Constantine wanted to be closer to the action. In 324 AD, he set about building a new city on the banks of the Bosphorus at the point where Europe and Asia meet. The city was called New Rome. It was designed to match the grandeur of the imperial capital, Rome, and so huge palaces were built and aqueducts were put in place to provide water for the population. A magnificent hippodrome was also constructed, in which chariot racing took place, a far less gory spectacle to watch than the more traditional Roman sport involving gladiators killing each other. Some sneered that the members of this new Roman Senate were from backgrounds far less prestigious than they had seen before, and included sons of coppersmiths, bath attendants, and even sausage makers. But it soon became obvious that this new city was as important as Rome itself, and it wasn't long before it was being referred to as the city of its founder, Constantine, Constantinople. Today, the city of Constantinople is known as Istanbul. The first real challenge to the city did not come from the Sasanians as expected, but from another source. Around the middle of the 4th century, a period of climate change resulted in rising sea levels, causing the spread of disease and changing vegetation on the belt of the flat steppe lands that stretched from the northern lip of the Black Sea through to the Pacific coast of China. The new conditions paved the way for the mosaic of tribes who lived there to come together. One tribe established themselves as the masters of the steppes, crushing all before them, the Xiongnu. Referred to in the West as the Huns, the Xiongnu already terrified the Chinese, but now they began to terrify everyone else. Even the way they looked was scary. Dressed in the skins of field mice that were stitched together, they ate roots and raw flesh, partially warmed by being placed in between their thighs. They were said to scar the cheek of infant boys when they were born in order to prevent facial hair from growing later in life. Some said that they spent so long on horseback that their bodies became deformed, causing them to look like animals standing on their hind legs. They behaved like wolves, wrote one author, and they excelled at stealing and killing. The Huns brought devastation wherever they went. City after city in China was being destroyed, wrote one Sogdian trader to his family. There were no profits to be made from business. Just staying alive would be a miracle. As the Huns spread west, many towns in Persia collapsed as the inhabitants fled. Some even crossed the river Danube into Roman territory, looking for asylum. The situation became so bad that the Roman emperor and Persian Shah put their rivalry to one side and agreed to work together against the Huns to save themselves from further devastation. A huge new wall was built near the Caspian Sea, paid for by both rulers and defended from soldiers from both empires. Relations became so close that one emperor even appointed the Shah as the guardian to his son and heir. Although the wall held firm, elsewhere chaos reigned. More tribes poured into Western Europe and marched on Rome. In 410 AD, the leader of one tribe stormed the great city. How is it possible, wrote St. Jerome, when he heard the news that Rome, which had conquered the whole world, had itself been conquered? Who could believe it? The rest of Rome's western provinces fared no better, and were ravaged in turn by tribes like the Goths and Vandals. As if that wasn't bad enough, the Huns then appeared in Europe, commanded by their brutal leader, Attila the Hun. Attila spent the next 15 years dominating Europe, extracting huge bribes and ransoms from Constantinople, although its enormous walls stood firm, before dying, drunk and exhausted, thanks to his overindulgent ways. It was a shameful way to die, wrote one historian at the time, who forgot to mention how relieved he was that Attila would no longer threaten what remained of the empire. The western half of the Roman Empire collapsed into chaos and took centuries to recover. Long-distance trade and travel all but ceased. People no longer built using stone. They'd even stopped being able to read and write. Why had God allowed this to happen? Some wailed. The answer was obvious. People had sinned, and God was punishing them. The story was rather different, however, in the eastern half of the empire, where things not only recovered, but began to flourish. Trade between Europe, North Africa, and Asia picked up, and with it, so did extravagant building projects such as the magnificent cathedral of the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. Ingenious new schemes to expand agriculture in Persia were also introduced, and astonishing palace complexes were constructed in the heart of Central Asia. In the east, much of the trade was controlled by the Sogdians, whose middlemen travelled in caravans made up of camels, transporting luxury items including spices, precious metals, and textiles, most notably silk, from one marketplace to another. The exchange of goods allowed ideas about fashion, food, culture, and faith to spread too. It was important that traders could be sure of their safety as they came and went. China observed that people in faraway Syria lived in happiness and peace, and their highways were famous for being safe as authorities across Asia ensured law and order were maintained. But peace would not last. In the 1590s, the balance was thrown into chaos when internal jostling for power in Persia set off a chain reaction that would eventually lead to all-out war with Constantinople. At first, fate seemed to clearly be in Persia's favour, as huge Roman cities like Antioch, Jerusalem, and Alexandria fell by one by one. By 626 AD, Constantinople itself was under threat and looked certain to be captured. But then, in one of the greatest fightbacks in history, Constantinople's army, led by Emperor Heraclius, rallied and, in a stunning series of successes, managed to push the Persians back. Soon the Romans had recovered all their losses and looked set to dismantle their old rival once and for all. The mood went from despair to euphoria in a matter of months. But 3 decades of endless conflict came at a price. Warfare was expensive and removed those involved from being productive, as it disrupted agriculture, trade, and daily life. The loss of fathers, sons, and brothers serving in the military was demoralising and heartbreaking. As both sides fought themselves to a standstill, it was time for something else. A new rumbling could be heard, and it came from the south, deep inside the Arabian Peninsula. A new faith was being born.